A man can steal your money, and you can earn it back. A man can steal your car, and you can buy another. But when a man steals your land, he steals the ground your grandchildren were supposed to stand on. That is what my son-in-law tried to take from me, and he almost got away with it. My name is Frank Delgado. I am 74 years old, and for 50 years, I was the licensed land surveyor for this entire county. I measured the boundary of every farm, every church, every cemetery from the river to the ridge. If two neighbors argued over a fence, they called me, and my word settled it. Nobody in this valley ever doubted where the line was until the day my own family tried to move it. It began on a spring afternoon when a stranger in a shiny truck pulled into my orchard. He was a developer named Curtis Vane, and he had a rolled-up map under his arm. He shook my hand and said, "Mr. Delgado, I am so glad we could finally close on the eastern 40 acres. I felt the ground tilt under my boots." I said, "Son, I have not sold a single acre of this land in my life." He frowned and unrolled his map right there on the hood of his truck, and there it was, a survey with my orchard split in half, a boundary line drawn straight through my apple trees. The eastern 40 acres were marked as sold, and the seller listed at the bottom was my son-in-law, Douglas Farron. I stood there in my own orchard, the developer and his map fluttering on the hood of the truck, and for a moment the whole world went silent. My son-in-law, the man who sat at my Thanksgiving table, who held my grandchildren on his knee, had drawn a line straight through my trees and put a price on them. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I simply asked the developer for a copy of everything, and I told him I would be in touch. A surveyor learns young that you never argue about a line out in the field. You go back to the record, and you let the measurements do the fighting for you. My daughter Marisol married Douglas 12 years ago. I never fully trusted him, but I loved her. So I welcomed him when my wife Teresa passed Douglas, started coming around more, always talking about the value of the land, always asking what my plans were for after I was gone. I thought he was just a nervous man, worried about the future. I did not understand that he was measuring me the way I once measured the land, figuring out where the weak line was, and he thought he had found it. You have to understand what that orchard means to me. My father came to this valley with nothing but a strong back and a used pickup truck. He cleared those 40 acres by hand and planted the first apple trees in 1960. One Eye was a boy of 9 years old, handing him saplings one by one. He used to tell me, "Son, a man does not truly own land, he only borrows it from his children." When my wife Teresa and I raised Marisol on this same ground, I planted a new row of trees the year she was born. Those trees are grown tall, now heavy with fruit every autumn. So when a stranger told me my orchard had been split in half and sold, he was not just talking about dirt and acreage. He was talking about 3 generations of a family and their whole history. If you have ever watched someone smile at your dinner table while planning to take everything from you, tap that subscribe button right now. This channel is for people who know that the quiet ones see everything now. Let me tell you how a surveyor catches a thief. I told the developer Curtis Vane to stop everything. I said that survey is fraudulent, and I can prove it to his credit. He went pale and said he had paid Douglas a deposit of $180,000 already, and that a licensed surveyor named Perry Cole had signed the map. That name landed on me like a cold stone. Perry Cole was a younger surveyor from the next county over. A man whose work had been questioned twice before the licensing board. Douglas had found himself a crooked measuring man together. They had drawn a brand new boundary, one that carved off my best 40 acres, the orchard my father planted in 1961. Here is what those two clever men forgot: a survey on paper is only as true as the iron in the ground. When I first surveyed my own land back in 1974, I buried iron pipe markers at every corner, 4 feet deep below the frost line, below where any plow or flood could ever move them. I stamped each one with my initials and the year those markers. Do not lie. They do not care who paid for a new map. They simply sit in the earth and tell the truth to anyone who bothers to dig. So the next morning before the sun came up, I loaded my old truck with a shovel, a metal detector, and my grandfather and his brass surveying compass. I drove out to the eastern corner of the orchard, to the exact spot where I knew I had buried a marker 50 years ago. My knees are not what they were, so it took me most of the morning, but I dug. And I dug, and 4 feet down my shovel-struck iron I brushed away the dirt, and there it was, my iron pipe stamped with FD in 1974, exactly where the true line was, more than 60 feet away from the fraudulent line on the developer and his map. I want to tell you what it felt like to kneel in that cold soil at 74 years old and touch that iron pipe my father and I set that marker together in the summer of 1974. He held the pipe while I drove it down with a sledge, and he wiped his brow and said, "Now, no man alive can ever move our line. He has been gone almost 30 years. But in that moment with my hand on the iron, he helped me bury. It was like he was kneeling right there beside me in the dirt. I did not cry out of sadness. I cried because I understood that my father had protected me from beyond the grave, and now it was my turn to protect the ones who would come after me. There was one more thing I needed to confirm. So late, one night I walked the fence line with a flashlight. Sure enough, Douglas had quietly pulled up my old cedar fence posts and reset them more than 60 feet inside my property, hoping the new line would start to look natural by the time anyone thought to question it. I found the fresh holes where the old posts had stood and the disturbed soil where the new ones went in, and I photographed every bit of it under the beam of my flashlight. He had moved a fence in the dark, but the land always remembers where its true corners are, and so did I. I photographed everything: the marker, the depth, the measurement from the marker to the false fence Douglas had quietly moved in the night. Then I drove to the county surveyor office where I had worked for half a century, and I pulled the original field notes I had filed in 1974 handwritten in my own careful print. The old records matched the iron. In the ground perfectly, the new survey by Perry Cole matched nothing except greed. But I did not go to the sheriff yet. I have spent my whole life learning that you do not draw a boundary until you have shot every angle I needed to understand the full scheme. So I drove out to see Perry Cole himself. I did not accuse him. I introduced myself as the old surveyor who used to hold his license number, and I asked to see his field notes for my property. A licensed surveyor must keep field notes for every job. The raw measurements taken on site. Perry Cole went quiet, then admitted he had never actually set foot on my land. He said Douglas gave him the coordinates and paid him to draft the map from an office chair. That is not surveying, that is forgery with a fancy stamp. Over the next 2 weeks, I dug up 3 more of my old markers at the north corner, the south corner, and the far eastern edge. Every single one sat exactly where my 1974 field notes said it would be, stamped with my initials, and the year I photographed each one with a measuring tape stretched from the iron to the false fence Douglas had quietly moved. I built a folder as thick as a phone book: old field notes, new photographs, the fraudulent survey, and a written timeline of every lie. I have spent 50 years teaching young surveyors that the map is only a story, and the iron in the ground is the truth. Now I was going to prove it in front of people who could put a man in prison. Let me stop and ask you something down in the comments. Tell me, have you ever had a family member try to take something that was never theirs? Land money, a family home. I want to hear your story. Now I had the truth. But truth alone does not stop a bulldozer. Douglas did not know I had discovered anything. He still believed the sale would close in 2 weeks, and that the old man would find out too late. He had already begun spending the money in his mind. He told my daughter Marisol they were going to buy a bigger house in the city. He did not tell her where the money was coming from. That detail mattered, because I needed to know one thing before I acted. Was my own daughter part of this? A father has to know. So I invited Marisol to lunch, just the 2 of us. I asked her gently what Douglas had told her about their sudden good fortune. She said he told her a business deal had finally paid off. She had no idea it involved my land. When I laid the 2 maps on the table, the true one and the forged one, she covered her mouth with her hand. She had married a man she did not truly know, and now she was learning it at a diner over cold coffee. My daughter was not a thief. She was about to become a victim too, and that changed how I would end this. I sat across from my daughter in that diner and watched her whole world shift on its axis. She kept saying, "I did not know, Dad. I swear I did not know." And I believed her. A father knows the difference between a child who is lying and a child who is breaking. Marisol was breaking. She had built 12 years of her life around a man who saw her only as the door. To her father and his land, I reached across the table and took her hand, the same small hand I once held, while teaching her to walk between those apple trees. I told her we were going to get through this together, and that no matter what happened, she and my grandchildren would always have a home on that ground. Word of what Douglas had tried to do reached the family slowly, and I did my best to shield the children from the ugliest parts. But my grandson is a sharp boy, and one night he asked me straight out if his father was a bad man. I chose my words, the way I choose a survey point, carefully and true. I told him, "Your father made a very wrong choice. But you are not your father, and you are not his choices. You are the future of this land, and this land is honest, so you can be honest too." I gathered everyone in one place, There is an office at the county building where boundary disputes are heard a formal review before the county surveyor, and a representative from the Land Records Division. I requested a hearing to correct a fraudulent survey filed against my property. The law required all interested parties to attend. That meant Douglas Perry, Cole, the crooked surveyor, Curtis Vane, the developer, and my daughter would all be in the same room. Douglas walked in that morning wearing a suit, smiling, certain the old man had made some confused mistake. He even patted my shoulder and said, "Do not worry, Frank, we will get this cleared up." The county surveyor, a fair woman named Ade Okoro, asked me to present my evidence first. I stood up slowly, my old knees aching, and I laid it out like the surveyor. I have always been. I showed the original 1974 field notes. I showed the photographs of the iron marker with my stamp 4 feet in the ground, exactly where it had always. Then I showed the measurement proving the new fence had been moved more than 60 feet onto my land. Then I turned to Perry Cole and asked him a simple question in front of everyone. "Did you ever once set foot on that property to take a single measurement?" The room went silent, and Perry Cole, under oath, could not lie to a licensing panel. He said no. A murmur went through that room like wind through the orchard. The land records official leaned forward, the county surveyor set down her pen, and even the developer Curtis Vane turned in his seat to stare at Douglas. A licensed survey signed by a man who never once walked the land is not a survey at all. It is a piece of paper pretending to be the truth. And in that moment, every professional in the room understood exactly what they were looking at. Douglas, and his smile finally died. He tried to say the old man is senile. He does not remember selling, but Ade Okoro simply held up my 50 years of filed records, every one in my steady hand, and asked, "Does this look like the work of a confused man?" Then Curtis Vane, the developer, stood up furious, now that he understood he had been sold stolen land. He said he had wired Douglas $180,000 for property Douglas never legally owned. That is not a family squabble anymore. That is grand theft, forgery, and filing a false public document. If your blood is up right now, tap that like button and let me know you are still with me, because the truth was only half the battle. The other half was making sure it could never happen again. The county voided the fraudulent survey on the spot. My boundary was restored to the iron in the ground, the true line my father and I had honored for 2 generations. The matter was referred to the district attorney. Perry Cole lost his surveying license permanently and was charged with fraud. He avoided the harshest sentence only by testifying against Douglas. Douglas Farron was arrested for grand theft, forgery, and attempting to sell property he did not own. He was sentenced to 7 years. The developer Curtis Vane got his $180,000 back through a lien on Douglas and his remaining assets, and he actually shook my hand afterward and apologized for trusting the wrong man. The word spread through the whole valley. Within a week, the old surveyor had caught a land thief with iron he buried half a century ago. Farmers I had not seen in years drove out to shake my hand. Some of them asked me to check their own old boundaries, worried that if it could happen to Frank Delgado, it could happen to anyone I spent that whole autumn walking other. People and their fence lines, digging up forgotten markers, settling arguments the way I did in my working years. An old surveyor is never truly retired. The land always has one more question to ask. My grandchildren do not fully understand what almost happened, and I am glad of that to them. The orchard is just the place where Grandpa lets them pick apples until their arms are full, the place with the old tire swing and the creek at the bottom of the hill. They will never know how close they came to losing it, and that is exactly how it should be. A man does his fighting quietly so that the ones he loves can go on living without fear. That is the whole point of protecting something, not the victory, but the peace that comes after. The licensing board revoked Perry Cole and his certification for life and posted his name as a warning to every surveyor in the state. The message was simple: if you sign your name to a lie, the iron in the ground will find you out. Even the young clerks at the county office who had helped me pull the old records said they had never seen a fraud unravel so completely. All it took was one stubborn old man who refused to trust a fresh piece of paper over 50 years of buried truth. But the part that mattered most to me happened quietly. My daughter Marisol filed for divorce before Douglas ever went to trial. She moved back to the farmhouse with her 2 children, my grandchildren, the very children who will one day stand on that eastern 40 acres. The orchard my father planted in 1961 is still whole. The apple trees still bloom white. Every spring last week, my grandson asked me why I bury little iron pipes in the ground. I knelt down beside him as much as my knees would allow, and I told him this. The truth is, like an iron marker, you can draw 100 false maps over it. You can move fences and pay liars and print new papers. But the truth just sits there in the ground, patient, waiting for an honest person to dig it up. Douglas thought he could redraw my life with a pen. He forgot that some men spend 50 years learning to measure what is real. There is one more thing I want to say. I could have grown bitter. I could have let the betrayal poison every sunrise I have left. But when I stand in that orchard now and watch my grandchildren climb the very trees my father planted, I feel something stronger than anger. I feel rooted like the iron in the ground, patient, and unmovable. Douglas tried to take my land, but he could never take the reason I fought for it. The land was never really about money. It was about the promise between the people who came before me and the people who will come after. If you are watching this and you feel small against someone bigger and richer and louder than you remember, the iron marker, do not shout, do not panic. Just quietly gather the truth and let it speak for itself. The loudest liar in the room always loses to the buried iron. Keep your records, keep your evidence, and never let anyone convince you that the ground you have honored your whole life is not yours. If this story meant something to you, please subscribe and ring that notification bell so the next story finds you. Tell me in the comments what part of the world you are watching from tonight, and tell me, was 7 years enough for a man who tried to sell his own family and land out from under them? I read every comment you leave, and if you want to see what happens when a locksmith is locked out of his own house, click the video on your screen now. Called my daughter, forged my will to seize my house, so I locked her out. Thank you for standing with me today. Stay grounded, stay honest, and never forget where your line truly lies.